So hello and welcome. Um, this is Utah Parent Center's Lunch and Learn series on social and emotional supports. And it's a three-part series. And today's part is a general overview, the concepts of behavior. And so I am Michelle Creek. I'm a consultant here, parent consultant at the Utah Parent Center. And also helping me on the chat stream is Mindy Rivera. And the two of us are really glad that you were able to join us today. So something good to know about the Utah Parent Center is that it's a requirement for all of the consultants here to actually have a child with a disability. And my youngest two children are adopted and they have multiple disabilities, which have given me some insights into the special needs that our children can have. And some of those special needs are around behavior. I also have 5 biological children, all of them boys, and they also gave me a lot of experience with behavioral challenges. So this was huge in my life as a parent, still is. And so I'm really excited to share some of the things that we have here that might help you with those challenges surrounding your child's behavior. First, I'd like to tell you that if you're unfamiliar with the Utah Parent Center, we are like a resource hub for the disabled community, parents of disabled children. And we have a lot of resources for every age and every stage of life to help your child live an inclusive life. Some of the projects that we have are Utah Family Voices, which is a medical portal. But they can also help you with things like applying for Social Security, Medicaid, those kinds of things. We have Family to Family Network, which is a group of parent volunteers throughout the state. And then we have parent consultants such as myself who can help you with special education concerns, IEPs, 504s, things like that. We offer workshops and webinars, all of which are free. And we have a wonderful website, utahparentcenter.org, that has links to all kinds of resources and a calendar of events that we host. And we even have DVDs and handbooks and manuals that we can mail you upon request. So we're really a good resource for you to use in helping raise your child with a disability. So just some housekeeping notes here. This workshop is scheduled to last about 30 minutes. And so we'll start out with a brief presentation, and then we'll follow that with a question and answer period. Now, because we have so many participants, I'd like to ask you to please go ahead and turn off your camera and your microphone. And if you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and enter those in the chat stream, which Mindy is manning for us. And if, by the end of the presentation, your questions haven't been answered, then we'll open it up for a Q&A, and we'll have a discussion then at that point. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get going here. So if I had but one life to give for my country, it would be Billy in the third row. And I'm pretty sure that there were teachers that thought that way about probably each one of my children at some point. And while the slide is a little humorous, we don't want our children to be in that position consistently, because behavioral challenges, as I'm sure you know, impede social relationships. They impede learning. They really affect all the domains of functioning, and they impact the entire family. It's really difficult dealing with your child's emotional outbursts and behavioral problems, whether it's at home or school, neighborhood, out in the community. Um, I'm old enough to remember that if you needed groceries or diapers or anything else, you actually had to load up the kids and go to the store. And it seemed like I could always count on some kind of behavioral issue happening at that point. Um, and it just takes a lot of emotional energy and a lot of consistency in applying interventions to change those problem behaviors. But it also takes a lot of energy to deal with the tantrums and the meltdowns and the embarrassment. So that's why you're here, right? You want to gain some information about better ways to intervene in those behavioral challenges and those social and emotional issues that happen in every family. It also helps if you have an understanding of behavior. And so that's what this session is about. We're going to just kind of look at some general concepts about behavior, what it is, where it starts, and how you can influence it. So, why are behavioral problems so challenging? Lots of reasons, right? I think maybe first off, they aren't quick fixes. They take time. They take repetition. Um, our daughters have problems with memory, short term, and because they can't remember things short term, it never gets moved to long term, and so we find ourselves repeating things a lot. And even for a recovering bossy person like myself, it can really be wearing sometimes how many times you have to repeat things. But that's what it takes if you want to affect long-term behavioral change. It isn't a quick fix. Behaviors can also prompt a lot of emotions in everyone, in the child, in us. Uh, some of your child's behaviors might trigger your own hot buttons. I know that happens with me. Certain issues that I seem to get more emotional around. Somehow my children have figured those out, and we seem to repeat, I guess, those same scenarios frequently. And the emotions, you always have to work, to keep the emotions under control in those. We might take their behavior very personally. We might see it as a reflection of our parenting or lack of parenting skills. And especially when you're out in public, it's embarrassing. You can feel the eyes, and that adds to the emotional pressure of the situation. We could also interpret their behavior as willful or defiant or purposefully trying to cause us discomfort and embarrassment. And so there are a lot of emotions involved in behavioral challenges. And a lot of the difficulty is actually in the way that we choose to see their behavior. So that's what we're going to be talking about. If we can change our perspective about their behavior and why it's happening, that can also help us figure out how to address those challenges. So, you can't teach children to behave better by making them feel worse. When children feel better, they behave better. And I'm sure you can tell that I'm a little bit older, and I grew up in a generation where the way that you changed behavior was punishment, right? Choice and consequences, and the consequence was usually a punishment. So parents tended to expect good behavior as the norm, and then when good behavior didn't happen, a punishment was applied. And that was expected to deter any future unacceptable behavior like that. And of course, it could work in the short term, especially, if the punishment was severe enough, but it wasn't really effective at shaping long-term behavioral change, and it damages relationships too. Um, Sometimes it even escalates the behavior as the child can get more and more frustrated and upset, especially with our children who might have problems with self-expression or communication to begin with. This is going to sometimes exacerbate the situation if punishment is the go-to for behavioral challenges. So let's talk about the brain really quickly. Behavioral theory says that our behaviors are often an attempt to get something or to get away from something or to control a situation. And this is certainly true. But often this behavior isn't the result of a conscious choice. Sometimes this behavior arises from a reaction to some type of sensory input from the environment that is then filtered through our different brain structures and results in behavior, which can be conscious or can be just an unconscious reaction. It might not be a thought out decision. So behavior can result from the way our brain is interpreting and responding to our environment. This is where a knowledge, we better go back there. This is where a knowledge of, a real simple knowledge of the brain comes in handy. If you look at the brain stem there, that's our survival brain, okay? This is unconscious. It's always scanning for dangers, for threats. Its purpose is to ask, am I safe? And so sensory input comes in, and if that part of our brain detects danger, it's going to send out signals, and it's going to trigger hormones and all kinds of responses in us, right? That then we aren't consciously in control of. And that's what happens when our brain senses danger for one reason or the next. Right above that is the limbic system, and that's where our emotions originate from. And the limbic system gets signals from our brain stem and also from other parts of our brain that's processing sensory input. And that is when we can react in the flight, fright, freeze, because we're flooding with emotions at that point if we feel unsafe. And at the very top of our brain is the cerebral cortex. And those are where the upper functions, the thinking, the reasoning, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which is often referred to as the executive brain, that's where we have access to logic and to reasoning, to memory, where we might be able to remember consequences and then project them into the future, where we can override our impulses, where we can kind of regulate our emotions. But we have to have access to that upper part of the brain in order to be able to do any of those thinking, reasoning, evaluating, controlling functions. So some of you have maybe seen the flipped lid model, right? Where, this is your brain stem, this is the limbic system, the amygdala. And if these are activated, then your upper brain flips and you lose access to that. So understanding that, even though it's a big oversimplification, understanding what happens when we feel unsafe helps us to understand how important it is then in hoping to address behavioral challenges that our child feels safe and doesn't perceive a danger in the environment. And once we understand that, then we can start understanding how to use positive behavioral supports that don't trigger defense mechanisms or escalate behavior because the child is feeling unsafe and those lower parts of the brain are in charge, instead of the upper part. So positive reinforcement, that is pretty self-explanatory. And I'm sure you can think of a lot of things that you do in your family for positive reinforcement. It's when you give something to the child that reinforces acceptable behavior. So it might be praise, it might be a Skittle, it might even be money. Some of my children were very motivated by money. It might be an activity. It might be, extra time watching a TV show or playing a video game or something. That's a positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. Negative reinforcement simply means that you are taking away something that is maybe less desirable to the child in order to reinforce acceptable behavior. So again, it's about reinforcing behavior in a way that the child can still feel safe and isn't triggered into those defensive brain postures. And so a negative reinforcement would be maybe, if you can get your homework done, by such and such a time, then, you don't have to do one of your chores. Or it might be, if you have 2 bites of your broccoli, you don't have to finish it all. Okay, something that the child maybe doesn't find desirable, removing that to reinforce desirable behavior. So it helps us to remember to avoid punishment and to use those positive behavioral supports if we can look at behavior as communication, because that's what it really is. It's communication. And that communication is often around something that they need. They might need sensory stimulation. If you have, a real wiggle worm, or somebody who just, can't stay in a position at one point, or is always touching, or, that kind of thing, they're seeking sensory stimulation. And so you can look at their behavior, which might be annoying, as they're communicating something. They're communicating a need that they have, and maybe give them some other type of sensory stimulation that is a little more acceptable or appropriate for the situation that they're in. Maybe they're seeking attention. This is a big one, especially with my daughters. They were in an orphanage before we got them, and neglected before that. And so they didn't get a lot of the attention and just the physical contact and closeness that they would normally have gotten in their early years. And so they want to be right up next to you all the time, always having your attention, usually having some kind of physical contact as well. And I could get really annoyed by that and not understand why they don't let me have some space. And it can be kind of exhausting sometimes. But if I can understand that they're communicating a need for attention, for that physical touch, then it's far easier for me to avoid the punishment route and to say, okay, let's get you something else right now because I have to go do this. Maybe they have a need for something that they want. And remember, our definition of needs can be quite different from theirs. One of my daughters loves sugar, anything sweet, but especially chocolate. And so she woke up one morning and she had this brown crusty stuff in her hair, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I went in and she had stuffed her pillowcase with chocolate chips, and they had melted during the night and gotten into her hair. And for her, that was a need. That was, her behavior was expressing a need. And so we had to work together to find more acceptable ways for her to get what she felt she needed than raiding the pantry and stuffing it into her pillowcase. But again, if I see that as communication, then I have an idea that, okay, well, let's think of some different ways then that we can fill that need, rather than just punishing her because she took something out of the pantry without permission and she made a mess and the pillowcase has to be washed and she needs to wash her hair now. And it's a different lens if you can look at it as communication. They might need to have control over their environment. That's a big one. Too, especially if our children don't have control over many things in their environment or didn't, then some of their very insistent, inflexible behaviors might be around trying to gain some kind of control. And again, if you see that as a need that they're expressing, then you can think of some creative ways to give them control over things, rather than, just being stubborn and digging in their heels or picking fights all of the time around that issue. So, to kind of summarize, behavior is communication, and it's not always willful, purposeful disobedience. Sometimes it is just an unconscious reaction. Maybe their clothing's uncomfortable. Maybe they don't like scratchy things. Maybe they have to have stretchy things. They don't like buttons, that kind of thing. Maybe they're not feeling well, and just can't express it or don't think to express it. And it might be part of their disability too, unconscious behaviors. And sometimes it might be communication about an unmet need. So this is where you have to do a little bit of detective work. And this is something that the Utah Board of Education has put in their behavior manual, which will be talked about in our future sessions. It's called the ABCs of behavior. And this is a system that's supposed to be put into effect to help teachers, caretakers, and parents as well figure out, where is this behavior coming from? What is it trying to communicate? So the A stands for the antecedent of the behavior. What happened just before this behavior? Sometimes it's obvious what causes the behavior or the reaction in the child. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you might have to do some observation and write some things down and see if there's a pattern. But behavior is usually a response to something in the environment. And if you can figure that out, then you have another tool that you can learn how to help address that behavior challenge in a more acceptable way. B, of course, is for the behavior. What is it exactly? And then C is the result of the behavior. Okay, what happens after this behavior? Could it be that the child actually is getting a need filled by this behavior? And if so, is there another way that you can fill that need? So you really do have to be a bit of a detective, and this process can help in that. Problem behaviors are often context related. Okay, they're a response to environmental events quite often. And so that's not an exhaustive list, but I'm sure most of you have experience with things that just set your child off. And so maybe you need to avoid those things or replace those things. Again, be that detective. Try and figure out, if you don't already know, what might be causing the behavior. And if you do know, then find a positive way to replace that behavior with something that's more acceptable. So again, you're switching that perspective from this is a conscious choice your child is making to your child is communicating a need with this behavior. And it's amazing the difference that it makes in my attitude. I know, at least, if instead of thinking, oh, my child always piles their plate so high they can't possibly eat all of that food, or they eat until they get sick. What what a greedy thing to do. Or I can look at that as communicating a need, that they're self-soothing, that they're afraid of being hungry again, that maybe it's a sensory issue as well. And I can then think of some more positive ways to help them replace that behavior with something that's more appropriate for them. Instead of thinking they're lazy, maybe they just don't know how to do it, or maybe they've forgotten, or maybe they're afraid to try because they think they can't. There are lots of reasons that a child may not want to do what you ask them to do. And so again, changing that perspective and trying to figure out why the behavior is happening and what it's communicating to you will allow you to be more positive and allow the relationship between you to be a lot more positive. And of course, you can think they're stubborn and non-compliant, or that they're just simply trying to drive you crazy. Or you can remember that they need to learn a more appropriate way to express their needs. So again, this is how you can remember to put those positive reinforcements and even negative, not punishment, but negative, meaning removing things that they don't like, to reinforce acceptable behaviors. If you can change your perspective to one that behavior is communicating something. And that's basically summed up by changing your perspective from a negative perspective, the child is the problem, they're doing this on purpose, they're being disrespectful, manipulative, and then you tend to respond with punishment. I know that's my default, or it was before I started to learn a little bit more about behavior. And you can change that to a more positive perspective of behavior, which is the child has a problem and they're trying to communicate it to you, sometimes in really annoying or embarrassing ways, right? Sometimes in very destructive ways even, but it's communicating a need. And if you approach it from that perspective, then you're more likely to be able to respond with empathy or support or help, and keep that relationship intact as you work to replace unacceptable behaviors with more appropriate ones. So next week, the presentation will be about some of those positive behavior supports and interventions that you can use at home. And then I believe the third week is at school, the positive interventions that can be used at school. So we didn't leave too much time for questions, but Mindy, were there any that you weren't able to answer? Uh-oh.
Nope, there weren't. Elizabeth does need you to go back to a slide, and I'm not sure which one she needs you to go to. Elizabeth, would you mind unmuting and clarifying which slide you need to see again?
Sure, it was just the second to last one. That one. Thank you.
Okay.
Did you have any questions that go along with this slide?
No, just misreading them, and I can be a little OCD, so I wanted to read them.
No worries, I'm taking notes, we get it.
No, Mindy, do you know on the Lunch and Learns if it's possible to send presentations to the people who are registered?
Absolutely. So I do want to make sure that you guys all have a chance to understand our process. So even though you guys did attend, they're not to worry that we will send out the recording and all of the materials. If we have anything that you guys or we think would be helpful for you after this presentation, we will send it out to all registrants. That is our process. So if you can't make it to the next Lunch and Learn, you are already registered. So you will receive that recording so that you can review it at your own time. Generally, the recording is available for 60 days from the time that you receive it. So you do have a good amount of time to study, call us, ask questions, etc. So yes, you'll receive that recording. And then there is, Michelle, a question in the chat that they would like another example or two of a negative reinforcement.
Oh, okay. I know it's so hard for me to remember that negative reinforcement isn't punishment. It simply means you're removing something that the child doesn't really find that desirable. So, maybe a chore, or maybe you give them, a choice of 2 vegetables at dinner, and you say, try both, and then you only have to eat one. You're removing something that normally they wouldn't like. I'm trying to think. There are lots of things that my children didn't like. If you can get, all of your chores done by such and such a time, then you don't have to do this additional activity. I think there are probably things that every child, they don't like to do. And of course, they do have to learn to do some things. But if there are optional things or optional elements of a job or a behavior that you're expecting from them, and you can reinforce a good behavior by saying, okay, if you do this, then you don't have to do that. There's something that maybe is optional that you don't have to do. We seem to have a lot of a lot of conflict around just basic home chores, right? Just things that you do around the home. And so we have checklists and expectations, and maybe in order to get them to do things in a certain time period, then maybe I'll say, okay, if you do this, then we'll leave the dusting until next week. Again, it's an incentive, but it's not actually giving them something. It's just kind of giving them permission not to have to do something. Does that help at all?
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
Oh,
I just typed in the chat, what a revelation. I've always thought positive reinforcement needed something else, and this is it. Like, it needed a balance, and this is it. It's not, I'm going to spank you, because I've never been on board with that. It's
right.
actually lightening their load and working along with them.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. This is such a revelation. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. And it was for me too, because I grew up in that era of you were just expected to do the right thing. And when you didn't, then you were punished, and the punishment was always negative, right? And so then when you hear negative reinforcement, then that's what you think. But it's not that you are applying something negative, you're removing something negative from the child's viewpoint.
Right.
Okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Now I can tell my mom, no, spanking isn't the answer, when she says, he really needs a spank.
I know. And even some of my older children will tell me that too. They'll say, why, and I say, no, you don't need to do that. But again, as a young mom, I didn't know those options. So this is really good stuff to share, because you want your child to feel safe, and you want to keep the relationship between the two of you as positive and strong as it can be. And that is going to help with behavioral change more than frightening them or triggering them or, damaging the relationship because you're angry and upset. So,
thank you so much.
Sure. Is there anything else, Mindy?
There is, and I was just typing. So I guess I will just say this out loud. Zach says this seems like a stark deviation from parenting from the love and logic way, which leverages natural consequences quite a bit. And you are absolutely interpreting that correctly. One of the things that we love to teach here at the Utah Parent Center is we love to make sure that natural consequences are there to happen. But our job as parents is to create a safety net for our kiddos so that they have the dignity to fail, or fail with dignity. I'm sorry, I completely choppered that amazing quote. We have a consultant here that uses that quote quite frequently, Stephanie, and I love it. It's, yeah, creating that safety net so that they can fail. We want to make sure that they fail sometimes because that's how we learn. That is how we grow, is learning from mistakes. So, and I actually love that you connected the love and logic parenting classes with this, because we do love their parenting classes and we do take some information from them from time to time.
Thank you, Mindy. And of course, you know your child best, right? And job one is keeping them safe. And so their freedom to fail, natural consequences might actually need to be around smaller things, right? For quite a while. You can't just let them fail at something where they would be endangered if they don't have the judgment there, or like with my daughters, they have a really hard time remembering consequences. So they can go through painful, scary experiences and not necessarily remember it the next time that they're in a similar situation. They don't necessarily remember to apply it. And so you as a parent need, to judge, how do I allow my child to learn from natural consequences, from mistakes that they make, but also keep them safe as much as you can while they're learning, right?
I will share one of the things that my dad did with me while learning how to drive. He didn't trust me with his car, as he probably shouldn't have, but he trusted me with the golf cart. And so he took me golfing and he let me understand what it felt like to control something, to control a vehicle. And I loved the thought of teaching that way of, here's the small little steps towards learning how to drive a giant vehicle, or a full-size vehicle, if you will, from a tiny little golf cart. And that was a perfect way of setting up that safety net of, if we crash, it's not going to be a $50,000 car. It's maybe a couple $100 fee from, but you understand what I'm saying here.
We did the same thing with go-karts. We really did. They had that need, that desire to control vehicles and but as a parent, you understand where their boundaries of safety are. So you try and choose a replacement, a substitute behavior that fills that need, but in a way that isn't going to jeopardize life and limb, right? So let them make choices within the boundaries that you determine for your child. Okay, I still see some numbers in the chat stream, but they may have all been addressed.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions, just some chatter happening, which is wonderful. We love that you guys connect and help each other understand.
Yes, I mean, as parents, we really need to share ideas, because at least I know that when my emotions, get triggered, I honestly can't remember all of the great creative ideas that I might have had the day before. And it takes practice and it takes repeated attempts on our part to switch our perspective to that communication lens, and then thinking of replacement behaviors that we can coach and that we can offer replacement opportunities maybe for them to fill their needs. And it takes practice, but if you change your perspective, it's going to help you come at this tough job, right? This long job of behavior change from a much more empathetic and calm state, which is good for everybody. So,
Michelle, can you go to the last slide?
the last one?
Yep.
Right there.
Thank you.
Yeah, we want to end on a good note, don't we? Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, look in your email. Will it come every week, Mindy, or just at the end of the series, do you think?
That's a great question. You know what? I generally like to try to get it out to participants or to registrants, sorry, within the week. So hopefully we can get it out to you before the week ends. And same thing with the rest of the Lunch and Learns. With it being on a Monday, it's a little bit easier to get it out to you guys same week. So keep an eye out for that. It will come from our Utah Parent Center email. So I know sometimes those emails have been going into people's spam folders. So keep that in mind as well. And if you guys have any questions, I will go ahead and put our telephone number in the chat. You are more than welcome to call in, pick our brains on a one-on-one consultation of what's going on with your kiddo and how we can help. And we have some really good resources for you guys for dealing with behavior in home and at school, as we will also cover that topic on the next 2 Lunch and Learns.
Yeah, and I'm sure that this will be mentioned in the next 2 sessions, but if you want, to take a preview peek, if you go to the UPC website, utahparentcenter.org, and you look under resources, the drop-down menu under resources, there actually is a tab for behaviors. And there's all kinds of videos and worksheets and articles, all kinds of resources that you can link to on the UPC website under their resources. So lots of good stuff and more to come in the next 2 weeks. So keep up the good work.
And I just put that in the chat, the behavior page.
Well, thank you.
From our website. Absolutely. One of the things I do recommend having a copy of, especially if your kiddo does have behavior problems in school, downloading the LRBI manual and studying that. It is pretty lengthy, so don't read it from cover to cover or you will enter a snooze fest, but making sure that you are aware of the laws that are put in place for consequences and how the school is obligated to deal with behavior.
Okay.
And I will send out a copy, if you guys can't get to that today, I will send out a copy of that when I send out the recording as well.
Yeah, I think probably section 6, individual behavior change is a good one. And then it does talk a lot about the responsibilities of the schools, and every school is expected to follow the protocols in here for positive behavioral interventions.
Any other questions? You can unmute if you feel that is faster. I know my fingers don't go as quick as my mouth does.
Hi, I missed most of this like talk. Are you going to give a recording and email? Is that an option?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course.
Well, we know how that goes, huh? Look at the clock and yeah. So I'm glad that we have that option. I think that's one good thing the pandemic has done, right? Is we've all learned how to do Zoom and the options there. So, yeah. Okay. You think that's it, Mindy? Okay, I think so too.
All
Again,
right.
thank
We
you.
hope to see you next week. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.